How many cold calls do you have to do to get a real estate wholesaling deal? Specifically, a real estate wholesaling deal of $10,000 or above. In today's video, I'm going to share with you exactly a case study from my real estate wholesaling business from doing thousands and thousands and thousands of cold calling hours. Also going to show you some case studies of other real estate wholesalers that are really newer and they do hundreds and hundreds of hours. And then I'm going to bring you back to the old days when I was in college, how many cold calls I had to do and how much I really made per hour cold calling in my dorm room to make over 6 figures a year cold calling in real estate wholesaling. So before we get into it, before I share with you, this is going to be really important. This is stuff and the numbers that no one likes to share unless you buy someone's special $2,000 cold calling wholesaling course. If you can, please smash that like button and subscribe so we can help this YouTube algorithm, so we can help as many wholesalers as possible, not give the gurus the money so they can do some more skip tracing and so they can get more numbers, so they can get more real estate wholesaling deals. So let's get into it. So I get this question asked so many times. So Zach, how many cold calls do I have to do before I get a deal? And honestly, it's never a really exciting question. I don't think someone gets jazzed up to do cold calling every single day, hundreds of hours and hundreds of hours. I feel like cold calling, it's fun. It's fun when you're getting deals for it, but when you're starting out and there's no certainty with cold calling, a lot of people dread it and they want to know how many calls they got to get through before they can get a deal. Now, the difference between them and me when I was starting out cold calling, I was so excited and pumped up every single day to cold call because I knew from experience, I already made 6 figures before. I knew exactly that every single call I did, I was one step closer from getting another wholesaling check and just some more money for me to live my dreams of financial freedom. So yes, you might ask this question and you might ask, there's no guy out there talking about cold calling for real estate wholesaling. I really had to learn the stuff by myself. So really quickly, if you want to get a free cold calling script, because you might be asking this question, type in the comments. If you can't, just go to this link right here and it will give you a free cold calling script from me. Now, to answer this question, I can't tell you exactly because there's a lot of variables. And I really what I want to do is break down the KPIs that you need to understand first. And then we can use those KPIs to reverse engineer of how many cold calls we need for a deal. So yes, the difference between this answer is it really depends. What dialer are you using? Are you going to use a hand dialer or do one dial at a time? Are you going to use like a call tools and do 10 dials at a time? What list are you using? What's the skip tracing technique you're using? And most importantly, what type of list are you calling? Because if you're calling a probate list, it's a very short amount of calls you need to get a deal versus if I call a huge high equity or huge tax delinquency list that 10 other wholesalers are trying to cold call. And lastly, I'm going to break down the numbers. Now, yes, I'm going to specifically answer if you actually cold call for your real estate wholesaling leads and how many cold calls you need to get with that one deal. But I really wanted to break down because maybe some guys out there, you're making 6 figures a year already and you want to understand how many calls if I got a VA or I hired an American, or let's say I try to hire my brother or my sister to cold call, how many until they get a deal? Because not everyone wants to cold call. So right now we need to understand what type of dialer do you want to use. You can use a hand dialer, use a Google Voice. If you have no money, use the Google Voice, use a spreadsheet and go from there. But really, if you had some money, I would 100%, one of your first purchases ever has to be on a dialer. And there's a lot of great dialers out there. I have a million videos on it, but what I do recommend for you is use a dialer that's at least 10 calls or higher, because one of the most important KPIs is how many dials until we get an answer. And if you're calling 12 at a time versus calling 3 at a time, you definitely can get more people. You get in front of more people, and the more faces and conversations you have, that means the more offers you give. And the more offers you give is the more deals that you get. And that's the most exciting part of this business. So really, the dialer I recommend is always ZenCall. That's the one that I personally use. Everyone says Batch Dialer is great. I heard it's really great. Call Tools is amazing. I used to use Mojo when I used to cold call back in the day. I'm going to share the numbers on there. I used a 3-line dialer, and honestly, if I had a ZenCall using a 12-line dialer, I could have probably quadrupled the profits that I got, and I was making 6 figures already cold calling from my dorm room. That's the dialer that I recommend. Another variable for the cold calling is going to be your experience. Are you out there? For me, humbly, this is a place of no ego. I could probably cold call better than the average newer wholesaler out there. So my cold calls to deal ratio might be 40 to 50% better than someone who's brand new or even a VA. So keep that in mind. If you're newer, expect that it's probably going to take you more dials and cold calls to get your first deal. When I was in my heyday of cold calling, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, I was absolutely destroying the phones versus when I was starting out, when I was 17, 18 years old, cold calling. And lastly, we got to understand the list and the skip tracing. So my favorite list for cold calling is high equity, which is going to be one of your lowest cold calls to actual deal ratio. But again, when we're cold calling a lot of numbers, we're going to need a lot of data, and a lot of data that someone's interested with a motivated seller would be high equity. Tax delinquencies, probates. Probate's probably one of my favorite. Code violations, water start-off list, tax liens, divorce lists, pre-foreclosures, vacants, absentee owner, and lastly, one of my last favorite cold calling lists is the high equity vacant list. That's a really interesting list to do, and I usually do pretty well for that. So those are lists you want to do. I'd get away from like those for sale by owners or properties that are on the market. It's a complete mess, and it'll mess up your cold calling to deal ratio. And lastly, what we got to understand is the skip trace, and what is the quality data we're going to use. So your ratio is going to really not be as good as if you use like a True People search. Now, True People search is an amazing tool. That's what I did when I was broke as a joke back in the day. But really, when I started getting more and more and more, you'll understand that you're getting paid hundreds of dollars an hour to cold call. And it's best to spend some more money getting the right skip tracing, because you're going to recall those lists over and over again for years. So I do recommend just going to smszach.com. That is probably one of the best skip tracing out there. It uses credit bureau data. So what you need to understand, everyone says credit bureau data. Credit bureau data is basically when someone applies for credit. Maybe they're going to buy that house that they owned 5 years ago. When they had to apply for that credit, they had to put in their name and their phone number. So you get a really good chance of getting someone's phone number. So now we went over some of the prerequisites of what makes a cold calling a higher ratio versus lower ratio. So let's get into the nitty gritty, guys. This is the good stuff. So what are the key performance indicators for me to get my first wholesaling deal? So these are the key performance indicators I recommend you track on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, quarterly basis, a yearly basis, but really daily. I need to understand, especially in my wholesaling business, when I have the VAs calling, I need to know what's going on. One of the most important ones are going to be dials per answer. So when I'm using a 12-line dialer, you're calling 12 at a time, so 12, and then someone might not answer, or someone answers, then you go to, then it puts another one there. So if you have thousands of thousands of thousands of leads, you're going to get some answers. So what I usually say is it's going to take around 8 to 12 dials before you get an answer. So if you're using a hand dialer, you're probably going to have to dial 12 times before you even get somebody on the phone. And that sucks. So if you have a 12-line dialer, you should theoretically only have a couple seconds in between the dialing per conversation before you actually go and talk to the next person. So maybe I'm dialing, dial. Hello? Hey, this is Zach. Hey, this is Zach. Hey, is this a Mary Sue by chance? Yes, this is Mary Sue. Hey, Mary, I was just asking you a quick question. Would you be possibly interested in a cash offer on your property? And then maybe they say yes, then I have a conversation, I qualify them from there, and maybe I set the appointment. But so usually I get a couple seconds in between before I get the next conversation. So now I'm getting this conversation, so it's usually gonna be 8 to 12 dials before I get an answer. So you might ask yourself, Zach, so how many answers until I get a deal? So we need to be a little more careful with our KPIs. So the next thing we understand is how many answers or how many contacts that we get that actually answer and say hello. How many of those until I get a lead? In my experience, when someone says hello to me actually putting them in my podio, they're pretty qualified, they're ready to go, they're actually interested in selling their property. They're most likely ready for me to see them in the house. I usually have to talk to at least 25 people before I get a solid lead to put in my CRM. Then from there, this is the most important one, how many leads does it take for me to get a deal, especially with cold calling? Now, I'm keeping this very general. I'm mixing the probates in with a high equity. I'm mixing the vacants in with the tax delinquency here. This is just a master list of cold calling. And on average, when I get 25 leads, I get one deal of $10,000 or more. Now, there's some $5,000 deals in there, and there's some $20,000 deals in there. But on average, with cold calling, it should be for you around $10,000. Our average is around $30,000, but that's because our acquisitions people are a lot more trained, and we're honestly the top dogs in our market. So you need to understand about 25 leads per deal. And then we can sort of zoom out here and kind of look at the numbers a little further. So then we can understand how many calls we need to do before we get the deal. Then we need to understand how much money we're actually making per call, how much our cost is per deal. So yes, how many cold calls till you get a deal is really important, but the most important one is an ROI for your business. So how much are we spending in cold calling versus how much are we getting in return in revenue? So overall, I'm going to be honest with you, it's going to take around 15,000 calls for you to get one deal. And that is from my personal experience. Now, before you exit out of the screen and run away and say, this sucks, this is terrible, I'm not doing 15,000. Remember, with a 12 line dialer like ZenCall, you could probably do around 360 calls per hour. And that's extremely impressive in my personal opinion. That's between you talking and calling and calling and calling. So what I would say is it's not really how many calls per deal, because calls can be arbitrary in my opinion. It's really, you have to look at the most valuable asset you have in your life, and that is your time. So how much time does it take for me to get a deal? Now, that's not a catchy headline that gets a lot of people to go watch this video, so I can't really say that, but sort of tricky here. But the real important question is, how many hours do I have to spend before I get a deal? And most importantly, how much money am I making per hour cold calling? Now, I've actually researched before I did this video, and I wanted to see, what are the gurus saying? Because I'm legitimately in this business. We cold call, and I know my numbers exactly. Like, I'm a data nerd with the cold calling numbers. And a lot of people are telling me, Zach, if you cold call for 40 hours, you should be able to get 2 deals of $20,000. And I call the bluff on that. Honestly, imagine this. So if you're telling me, these gurus and coaches out there are telling me that it only takes 40 hours of cold calling to make $20,000, that literally means if you work 40 hours a week, you make $1 million per year in wholesaling real estate. That's not right. I'm just going to be honest with you. It is completely wrong. If that was the case, I think all these people cold calling every day would be 7-figure wholesalers. And honestly, why would I even have this whole team around me if that's literally, I could do $1 million solo without a team or partners or anything like that? I don't believe it. And in our business, that's not what it is. And we do virtual wholesaling everywhere. And even when I was in my own dorm room, I was making hundreds of thousands of dollars, but I wasn't making millions. And I was cold calling like 20 to 30 hours a week. So the truth in our business, and from real actual cold callers out there, it takes on average about 1 deal per 40 hours if you're really trained and you know exactly what you're doing. So if I went behind the dialer and I started cold calling for 40 hours, I could 100% get a deal of $10,000 or more. And that really comes down to around $250 per hour, which is absolutely phenomenal. That's like lawyer money right there. It's absolutely great. And honestly, if you kept it up, you'd make really good money. But you need to understand, so what are the KPIs for my business? So that is it, about 1 deal per 40 hours when I do it. For a VA is about half as good as me. So it takes them 80 hours of dialing to get a deal, and our average deal is about $20,000 to $30,000. So it works pretty well. But think about it like that. If I'm making $250 an hour in cold calling and the VA's value is half of mine, so it's $125 an hour is their value, and I only paid them $5 an hour plus commissions, which really turns out to $10. I could literally give someone $10, I get $125 back in value. That is absolutely insane. And that's what I do in my business. That's why we scaled up the cold calling. We keep it very niched out, and we keep it pretty good. But think about it like that when you're wanting to scale up. But obviously, if you're starting out, don't do that. Get some deals on the way. But that's really the KPIs for my business also. And you might think to yourself, Zach, what happened when you're in your dorm room? So I was cold calling from 2 to 7 every single day, Monday through Friday, every single week. And that was about 25 hours of cold calling per week. And I made around $125,000 in 1 year cold calling from my dorm room. So those are the numbers for me. That's honestly what it's going to take you to get a deal. So no, there's no sexy special formula or cheat code in cold calling. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hustle mentality. You're going to need some motivation out there, but really, I personally can attest to this. I don't know anybody who cold calls a valuable skip traced list 40 hours per week, every single week for an entire year straight, that did not make 6 figures a year in wholesaling. So it is absolutely truth. I just gave you the tools to make 6 figures a year in wholesaling real estate. It sucks. It's not fun. That is the honest truth. It's like, hey, how are you gonna squat 700 pounds? It sucks. You're gonna have to work out a lot. How are you gonna run a marathon in 3 hours? It's a lot of work and it's a lot of strenuous activity, but there is a reward at the end, guys. So that is it. That is the KPIs, what it's gonna take you to actually get a deal and how many calls you need to get per deal in real estate wholesaling. So thank you so much for watching this video. Cold calling for real estate wholesaling is one of the best ways out there right now to get your first deal. Cold calling is really, it was sexy like 2.5 years ago, and really it's lost its steam, the wholesaling community, but honestly, we're still getting deals from it, and I think it's absolutely one of the best ones out there. So if you want to get my free cold calling script, There's no sales funnel. I'm not going to sell you any courses or anything like that. It's absolutely for free. I just do it from the love of my heart because I don't want you guys to be buying these crazy cold calling courses. Just go to www.flipwithrick.com, go to free content, and all my scripts will be there for you. I truly appreciate you watching this stuff, and God bless.